The law only bites if we hold the leash. They called the chamber a garden, but the carpet smelled like solvent and new wool. Filtered starlight washed through polarized glass, cooling my wrists as I signed the attendance packet. The station's slow spin tugged a thread of nausea through my ribs. An audience of traders, shipwrights, and postmasters filled the tiers, their murmurs a soft storm around the dais. This wasn't a trial yet, only an inquiry, but the proctorate's crest hung over us like a loaded verdict. I set my palm on the embedded slate and met the house lens. "My name is Commander Mara Ives of the Commonwealth Courier, St. Lucia," I said. "I am here to contest the gratitude tithe assessed against the famine convoy of Argon Reach." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Somewhere above the atrium, the court beacons warmed from blue to amber. The inquiry would be public. The record would be immutable. Do not flinch from the light. Talus pulsed a quiet chord in my inner ear, the audio-somatic interface threading a measurable calm along my spine. Pulse steady, breath shallow, signal integrity good. My ship mind spoke like a patient teacher. He had been grafted to St. Lucia a generation before my birth, a venerable intelligence trained in accountancy, navigation, and dispute practice. The fleet joked he was a bishop wearing thrusters. Today, I needed the bishop. Proctor Vale arrived 5 minutes late. He brought the kind of silence that only fear can prepare. He was thin, carbon-rimmed, and wore the black sash of a collections magistrate. He bowed to the crest, then to the quorum of citizens. He did not bow to me. "We proceed," he said, voice like rain on tin. "All statements given under penalty of misrepresentation. Say it under oath or leave it unsaid." I took the floor again. The dais microgyros compensating for the station's sway. 3 weeks ago, the Argon Reach convoy transited the Daphnis Gate. A proctorate cruiser ordered us to stand to for assessment. They demanded 20% of the medical cargo as gratitude tithe for gate maintenance. A murmured ripple passed the audience. I let it ride. The requesting vessel cited Proctorate Code 143B. We complied with inspection, but declined the tithe on grounds of humanitarian exemption under Inter-Accord 22. The cruiser threatened impoundment and collateral seizure. We escaped only when a coronal flare forced a course change. Proctor Vale's lips did not move, but I could feel his satisfaction. "Your escape is not the subject," he said. "Your failure to pay the lawful tithe is." Lawful, I kept my hands visible, open. A doctrine never ratified by the Accord Council is not law. It is a collar slipped over frightened throats. "We don't wear chains. We didn't vote." Talus trilled a warning. "Mara, avoid metaphor. Precision wins." He projected a table across my left retina gate costs. Tariffs, declared transits, maintenance deltas, numbers, cool as ice. I softened my voice. The Proctorate's ledgers list escalating gate expenditures. Yes. But your books also hide offsetting credits, third-party subsidies, war claim abatements, bond interest holidays not counted when you tithe frontier convoys. Vale blinked. Accusations of hidden entries must be proved. They will be. I stepped back, giving the audience a clean view of the evidence hollows. Talus floated translucent columns, each with citations. So plain a harbor steward could read them. I'm not here to rant. I'm here to invite you to speak your method. Proctor, on the record, with witnesses. Speak it out loud so everyone hears. He inclined his head a millimeter. Very well. The gratitude tithe is a necessary instrument. We provide the gates. We levy a tithe on those who benefit. Reciprocity promotes stability. Your word is tithe, I said. The frontier's word is extortion. The lens above us tightened focus. A child stirred in the third tier, bare feet, knotted hair, eyes catching every glint of holographic ink. Sensory detail anchored me. The salt metal tang of recycled air, the flit of service drones, the low throb of the spin motors. Behind my eyes, Talus arranged figures like a choir. Witness quorum 214 registered. Sector feed live, he said. If you intend the corridor gambit, we require one more admission from him. I intend patience. I said inside, then aloud. Proctor, I request a corridor of law, period. The audience stiffened, then fluttered with recognition. The corridor of law was an old Commonwealth tactic. Give your opponent a narrow path of rules, compel their feet to walk it. You didn't barge a fortress. You drew them to the walkway, where gravity knew your name. Vale could have declined. He could have entered summary calculations and called his tithe due. Instead, he smiled with only one side of his mouth. Granted, you just stepped where we wanted. We recessed with the formal chime. I turned from the dais, the fabric of my jacket whispering against my wrists. Talus dimmed the overlays. The atrium shifted back into the hum of barter, gossip, and the tinny chime of a noodle cart in the back corridor. The smell of star fruit and engine oil braided the air. I needed more than numbers to win. I needed story. Faces. The kind that made a ledger into a wound. Before any set piece, I learned to listen. On the lower tier, a woman in a dock-hand vest cradled her elbow like it hurt. You were in the convoy, I asked. She nodded. My son is on Argon Reach. His lungs don't like dust. I sent filters. The proctorate wanted cases of them. Name I asked, not for the record, for the echo inside me that made anger let go of my throat. Leon Strom. Talus pricked the memory in his quiet way. Recorded with consent. He projected a tiny green dot at the periphery of my vision. One voice. Clear. And then others, a baker who traded yeast packets for school tablets. A courier who scraped a hull to pay a gate toll. A teen who learned to solder because dock lights burned out faster than the paperwork moved. Their lines were short, their eyes cautious. I took all of them, like coins across my palm, and felt the weight. Don't let them turn lives into merchandise. Back aboard St. Lucia, the docking clamps released with a sigh like a tired animal. The ship's spine hummed as coolant cycled. I rested my forehead against the bulkhead and breathed in metal, oil, and steamed rice from the mess. Talus dimmed the forward displays for the night cycle. A false dusk poured along the corridor. You should sleep, he said. I undid my boots, then didn't. What if they burn our corridor tomorrow? What if they show a jury a mountain of bills and call it burden? Then we show them a mountain of receipts and call it truth, Talus said. But more, we show a way for the station folk to carry less. Always teaching, I closed my eyes. Do you ever get tired of being good? Only when you're tempted to be clever, he said. And I could hear the smile he wasn't coded to have. Clever fails when kindness has evidence. The first escalation came at dawn shift. Station security pinged us with a hull inspection mandate, flagged by the proctorate. The notice was clean. The timing was not. Inspection at the moment our council window opened. They wanted me trapped in engineering while Vale argued unopposed. Talus flexed the dorsal cams. 3 inspectors. 1 crate scanner. 1 hull drone. Legitimate. but rushed. Stall them long enough to keep me in the chamber, I said. Legal stall only, Talus said. I'll ask them to state their authority aloud thrice. I almost laughed. Your ritual math. Words bound, he said. Always. Bind them with their own sentences. I jogged the spineway, shoes soft against lattice flooring. Cool air licked the sweat at the back of my neck. In the corridor, 2 of my officers waited. Len sat with his back to a locker, eyes bright from too much coffee. Corray checked a tablet, her thumb flicking in tiny circles as she read. Vale is going to poison the room with accountancy theater, Len said. We need a spectacle too. I don't need spectacle, I said. I need witnesses. Corray raised an eyebrow. Witnesses often attend spectacles, I sighed. We'll give them a mirror, not fireworks. Show them what they did in their own numbers. We returned to the chamber as the beacons warmed. The sound was a felt thing, a low, sympathetic vibration through bone. Vale opened with a curated medley of cost, ring stabilizers, magnetic sheath replacements, duty rosters. He spoke without flourish, every figure a tightening fist. He never looked up at the audience, only at the feed. He was performing for the record more than the room. When he finished, I didn't approach the dais. I walked to the 3rd tier and sat on the empty step beside the child with the knotted hair. What's your name? I asked. She glanced at the court lens, then me. Miri. Can I borrow your eyes for a moment? I asked. She bit her lip, then nodded. I rose and gestured her toward the gallery rail. The audience shifted. Interest electric. I pointed at the maintenance cost column floating in the air. Read the bottom line. Her voice carried farther than I expected. It says, deficit 2.1 million. Now read the footnote, I said. She frowned, then looked up, surprised. It says third-party subsidy not reflected in deficit reports. See appendix. The audience murmured again. On the dais. Vale's mouth tightened. He had not thought anyone would read the fine print aloud. The appendix is not germane to. It is when you take food from sick mouths because a column looks red, while the next page is black with relief. I faced the quorum. This is the method you show a deficit. Hide a credit, and call the remainder a tithe. If you hide a credit, you owe an apology. Talus fed me the next move in a soft, melodic line. Corridor pressure applied. He must now justify omission or concede visibility. Vale produced a small, perfect smile. Visibility is a matter of practical governance. Every ledger has different contexts. I raised a finger. Not for him, but for the quorum. He admits the ledger is fractured. I turned to the crest. I invoke the mirror statute. The air thinned. Even the noodle cart chimed in surprise. The mirror statute was older than the gates. If a party concealed context to claim a debt, the opposing party could request a mirror reframe all entries through the same context and return costs proportionally. It wasn't often used. Mirrors could cut both ways. Proctor Vale spread his hands. Granted, he said after a long second, voice smooth. But we choose the reference context. No, I said. At the same instant, Talus whispered, no inside me. The statute dictates a neutral baseline gate maintenance costs as a percentage of total sector throughput value. Credits included. All of it counts or none of it counts. The second escalation didn't come from Vale. It came from the room. A shipwright stood, grease on his cheek like a badge. If we mirror, do our docking fees change? A postmaster raised her hand without being called. If the tithe is returned, who gets the credits? We already paid. A courier lifted a baby over her shoulder and spoke quietly. What happens with the impounded crates stuck in Bay 4? I let them speak. I wanted their voices in the record. Talus threaded each line to a cohort label shipwrights, postmasters, couriers. He made a living taxonomy of concern, each question braided to the next. When they ran out of air, I gave an answer I could defend later. Visibility first, I said. Then proportional remittance to harmed parties. Then policy revision, so this never happens again. When you see the damage, you can pay it back. We recessed again to compute baselines. Talus swallowed data like rain. His internal heat maps drew my eye with their slow, pulsing geometry. We require external packets the Proctorate keeps off station, he said. We can request with citation. They may delay. Make the request, I said, and ask them to state refusal out loud if they try. Already drafted, he said, amused. Len met me by the viewport. The station's curve, a silver smile beyond him. You just declared economic war. I declared arithmetic, I said. Corray exhaled softly. Arithmetic with teeth. Teach them that numbers can defend the weak. The message returned faster than I expected. Vale had sent it himself, signed digitally and visually. He approved release of the packets with an attached comment, transparency is our instrument. Commander, we fear no mirror. Confident, Len muttered. Or arrogant, Corray said. Or he knows we'll find something that looks bad for us, I said, and felt Talus nudge reassurance through a line of cool sound. We don't hunt for scandal. We hunt for balance. Balance that cuts both ways, still saves lives. We went back under the beacons. The mirror operated like a tide. Costs swam under credits. Credits swam under costs. The remainder shrank and grew in cycles like breath. In 2 cases, the Proctorate looked worse than it had claimed. In one, the Commonwealth did. I didn't hide that. I spoke it aloud. The audience didn't cheer. They nodded. Truth had a sound. It wasn't music. It was wood on wood. A chair planted square. Vale's face, for the first time, showed strain. Your method is theatrical, he said. It is legible. I said, if you want private theater, hold a closed audit. If you want law, hold it where people can see. Open law, or it's only threats with stationery. The third escalation was a message rooted to me alone. Talus wrapped it in quarantine when it touched our systems, then displayed it with a border of quiet red. From Proctorate Deputy Marin. I skimmed. It was an offer, not a bribe. Too disciplined for that. A resolution framework. If we withdrew our mirror petition, they would issue a humanitarian carve-out for Argon Reach only. No precedent. No admission. A tidy exit for me. A full belly for the Reach. A future caller for everyone else. I put my hands on the back of a bench and let my knuckles press pale. The bench was warm. Someone had sat there recently. My stomach felt like the station's spin had tilted again. Talus didn't speak. He waited. Draft a reply. I said, 1 line. Ready. We don't trade tomorrow for a loaf today. Do not sell a principal for a single meal. I didn't send it. I delivered it in the chamber, with the cortograms flowing on the public wall. I read Deputy Marin's offer aloud, and then my answer, and the audience's noise was not applause. It was relief, braided with dread, like sailors hearing a new reef and trusting the map anyway. Vale stared at me long enough that I heard my pulse in my neck. You seek a precedent, he said softly. I seek a future. I answered. We are near the first loop closure, Talus said in my ear. Mystery seeded. Partial reveal achieved. Payoff pending the remittance mechanics. Show them, I whispered. We don't win when we win alone. Talus projected the remittance map. It was not flashy. It was a stripped, clean flow tithes collected by the proctorate under gratitude doctrine over the last 6 cycles. Credits and subsidies concealed by context, mirror application, remainder returned to harmed parties via station escrow. Names didn't appear, only cohorts. We didn't put Miri's face on the wall. We put her community's needs. The map pulsed. A thin line blinked at the bottom escrow ledger initiating. Len's breath hissed in surprise. Kare's fingers stopped their nervous circles. Vale's eyes narrowed. You presume to execute before adjudication. I presume to prepare, I said. The escrow will not disburse until this quorum ratifies the method, but I want the machinery warm. Warm the engine so justice doesn't stall. Vale's reply wasn't at the dais. It was in the air. The station's lights shimmered as if they had swallowed too much sun. Talus chimed a hard warning. Power transient, not local. The proctorate tug is tying into the grid. They are going to stage an overload and call it cost. Can they? I asked aloud before I could stop myself. Lawfully, yes. Morally, you know the word. Enough, I said. Make them count what they spend to hurt you. I stepped forward and lifted my palm toward the crest. Proctor Vale, I said, pitching my voice to the lens. State your intended draw on the station grid. The air tasted of ozone. A ripple of hair rose against forearms across the tiers. Vale did not flinch. We will demonstrate average gate upkeep by temporarily simulating a coil cycle. On a station full of sleeping children, I said. Demonstrations are often inconvenient, he said. I took a breath that felt like swallowing a coin. Then demonstrate on us. The silence that followed was not empty. It had edges. Len's head snapped toward me. Kare's mouth opened, then closed. The audience didn't know whether to praise us or run. Vale's gaze sharpened. On your ship, on our ship, I said. Tie your draw to St. Lucia. Do not touch this grid. If you want to show cost, show it where I consent. Choose your battlefield, or someone else will. We shifted in minutes that felt like hours. Docking arms clanked. Power umbilicals rethreaded. Talus dimmed non-essential systems, his tone still calm, but with a tremor I had never heard. Heat margin tight. Hull stress negligible. Primary capacitors ready. If they push too hard. Don't finish that sentence, I said, then wished I had not. If they push too hard, we blow relief coils and cook the induction bay. Len fought a smile and then didn't. Everything worth keeping costs something, he said softly. Kare took my shoulder in a grip that was both iron and permission. Let them see what you hold. Let them see what we're willing to pay. The proctorate tug's virtual coil spun up. The current they demanded sang through St. Lucia like ice char. The deck vibrated. My teeth felt it. Talus whispered counts like a litany. 3%, 5, 8, holding at 10. The induction bay fans went from purr to growl. Condensation beaded along a conduit and shivered like a caught breath. Vale watched the displays with clinical interest. Average cycle at 12. Hold at 10. I said, we will show you the cost at 10, and then the cost at 0. He raised an eyebrow. 0, I said. Because that's what you never count. The gate's at rest. The station's asleep. The moments you don't pay for because you can't monetize silence. Count the quiet or you don't count the truth. Talus cut the draw with surgical grace. The shuddering stopped, except it didn't. Everywhere I looked, the room kept vibrating in body memory. Vale made a note with his thumbnail and looked bored. He wasn't. He was collecting more than numbers. He was collecting narrative. In the war of stories, he carried a ledger like a blade. The inquiry adjourned for the shift change. I didn't go back to the ship. I walked the market ring with Talus whispering through my bones like a second pulse. The smells kept me honest: fried dough, hot solder, the faint mineral ghost of brine imported for a spice stall. People pretended not to look at me and failed. A small boy held a printed ship, its angles rough, its label smudged, St. Lucia. He ran it along a bench and made a sound that was not quite an engine, not quite a sigh. Two teens argued about whether the Commonwealth would actually return fees. A grandmother counted beans into a paper cup. Each thunk a promise to keep breathing another day. If it doesn't touch the market, it's only theory. At the next session, Vale changed the game. He did it with kindness. "Commander," he said, "your commitment is admirable. Your proposal shows care, but your mirror, if ratified, will redirect funds from gate maintenance during a volatile cycle. We will fall behind. The frontier will suffer. Then open the books fully," I said. "Show the subsidies, the bonds, the escrow you hold against future credits. Show it all. Let the room decide if falling behind is a story or a spreadsheet." He nodded, as if we were in league rather than opposed. "I propose a compromise. We keep the gratitude doctrine, but carve permanent humanitarian exemptions at your discretion." He had learned from the deputy's failed message. He had clothed the same hook in velvet. Talus hummed a caution that was very close to a prayer. "This is popular now. It makes you judge of mercy. It will make you queen of rationing." "I am not a queen," I said, then realized I had spoken aloud. The room smiled. I flushed. "I am not a ration clerk either. Don't let them crown you just to hide the leash." We broke to draft countertexts. Correa pulled me into a side corridor where light from a maintenance hatch drew a square across the floor. "You have to give them something," she said. "If not, they paint you as doctrinaire." "I'll give them certainty," I said, "not discretion." Len winced. "People love discretion when it benefits them. Then I want them to love rules instead," I said. "And if they don't love them, to trust them." Talus set a quiet bell in my ear. "I have a proposal. It is aggressive and lawful. It is a mirror of energy and of money, both." "Show me," I said. "Make the whole sector watch the math." His plan was simple enough to be beautiful. A system-scale mirror link the station's public ledgers and the Proctorate's gate accounts to the same beacon lattice used for distress calls. Route all Tithe collection into escrow with receipts, visible in real time. When credits hit from subsidies or bonds, the escrow recalculated proportionally and returned costs automatically to harmed cohorts. No callers, no private discretion, only the beam of the math. "It's audacious," Len said. "A little in love. It's so clean they'll call it naive." "Clean isn't naive," Correa said. "It's terrifying." I rubbed my knuckles until they didn't feel like glass anymore. "We'll need the beacon. Talus. We'll need the court's permission to tie ledgers to the distress lattice. We can ask," Talus said, "and we can do it with witnesses. Ask with the whole room listening." We requested lattice access in open session. Vale objected on technical grounds, then procedural ones. He was deft. He never said no in a way that could be played back later without sounding reasonable. I countered with a corridor, a narrow rule from an old salvage act. If a station's livelihood faced systemic risk from a private accounting method, the distress lattice could be used to broadcast remedies for the duration of the risk, under public oversight. Vale's hands tightened on the edge of the dais. He knew the act. He knew I had him. "Public oversight," he repeated. "Who sits that board?" "The same people who live with your doctrine," I said. shipwrights, postmasters, couriers, dockhands. We can draw lots, or we can vote. But they said it. Not us. Put decisions in the hands that pay. The chamber did not cheer. It inhaled. The difference mattered. One is heat. The other is oxygen. We voted to open the lattice for ledger light. The beacon warmed from amber to white. The hum of it was deeper than sound. It shook dust from high corners and made it glitter in the brightness, like stars pulled close enough to count. Talus threaded the first feed through. Numbers appeared on the chamber wall, and I knew, on every public screen across the station, tithes in, credits in, escrow, balance up or down. A red line blinked where remittance would begin if ratified. Vale watched with a face borrowed from marble. "Commander," he said, "if your method miscalculates, the failure will be public." "If it fails, we fix it in public," I said. "Fail in front of everyone and get better." We were not done. We were not safe. The Proctorate could appeal to the sector court. The Proctorate could send ships. The Proctorate could bide and bleed us. I knew all of that the way a pilot knows the small list of ways a hull can break. Knowing did not absolve me of choosing. In the drift after the session, I stood under the beacon and felt its heat against my cheeks. Miri stood there too, the child with the knotted hair. She squinted up at the light as if it were a sun she had never seen. "Does it hurt the beacon to be on so long?" she asked. "No," I said. "It was built for worse." "Then keep it on," she said. Fierce as a captain. "Keep it on until they look away first." At shift's end, the station quieted like a choir settling after the anthem. Talus lowered his voice to a murmur. "Mara, there is a message from home." Admiral Sarit. My jaw tensed on reflex. Sarit was both friend and the nearest thing the Commonwealth had to a conscience with a budget. "Put her through," I said. Her face appeared in my augment. Silver hair, braided, eyes like the sea used to be. "You're cutting a channel that can't be closed," she said without greeting. "That's the point," I said. "You'll make enemies we'll have to feed," she said. "I know," I said. "Proceed," she said, and swallowed whatever else she wanted to warn me. "The council will catch up to you. Or pretend they meant this all along. Let them catch up to us in public." I slept 3 hours on a bench in the mess. Head on folded arms. The smell of rice and broth, a blanket too thin, but still a blanket. I woke to the sound of Talus humming a scale I had never heard. "Ledger load stabilized," he said. Public inquiry trending to favorable sentiment. Proctorate bots gossiping to dilute. I am bored of their diction. "Don't get cocky," I said around a yawn. "I am incapable of that sin." He lied. The final motion of the day was procedural, establish the oversight board for the lattice ledger. That was where Vale made his quiet, deadly move. He nominated 3 sympathetic experts, calm, respectable, and loyal to his sash. I nominated Leon Strom, the dockhand with the hurt elbow. I nominated the baker with the yeast tablets. I nominated the courier with the baby. I watched Vale try not to sneer and fail. "Competence matters," he said. "Lived costs matter," I answered. "Choose the hands with calluses." We compromised because that's what law is. 3 experts, 3 workers, 1 rotating seat for a random citizen chosen by lot each week. It wasn't clean. It was real. I could stand on it without slipping. As we adjourned, the station's chronometers clicked to night. The hum changed. The beacon stayed white, but softer, like a heart still awake under blankets. I walked the empty corridor outside the chamber and put my palm against the wall. It was warm where the conduit ran. I pressed harder and thought of the corridors I had walked as a child on a different station with a different hunger humming its wires. "Mara," Talus said, gentle. "Do you want a story from the old days? Only if it isn't meant to soothe me, it isn't." He paused. When the St. Lucia was first commissioned, her fleet note read, "We teach by numbers and remember by ledgers, never by collars." The corridor seemed to drink that sentence and keep it. Never by collars. The next morning, the board took their seats under the beacon. Leon sat very straight. The baby chewed on the corner of a soft sleeve while his mother balanced a stylus on her knee. The baker smelt like cinnamon and thyme. The experts looked pained, then acceptable, then attentive. We began the hearing that would make the mirror into more than a demonstration. Vale opened with an attack on my standing. It was subtle. He praised my courage. He praised my commitment. He suggested, by the rhythm of his sentences, that individual bravery was not a substitute for institutional wisdom. He was not wrong. He meant it to be a blade. I took it from him and used it as a ladder. Individual bravery is dangerous, I said, because it can be bought, broken, or burned. That is why we do this with witnesses. That is why we codify. That is why we seek a rule anyone can apply without calling me. Make yourself unnecessary or you become a tyrant. The board asked questions. Real ones. Hard ones. The baker wanted to know how cohorts would be defined by trade, by dock, by address. The expert in beam economics wanted to know about latency between credit registration and remittance recalculation. Leon wanted to know who would fix the pipes. I answered as far as I could. When I couldn't, I said, "We will decide that here." I didn't say, "Trust me." I said, "Trust this room." Trust the room, not the uniform. We were almost through the day's docket when the chamber doors opened in a wind that smelled like vacuum baked in the sun. A captain strode in, collar high, boots polished to denial. His sash read, "Sector Marshal." He inclined to the crest and not to the room. "By authority of the sector court," he said, "this inquiry is stayed pending review." I felt Talus reach for my pulse again, and I let him take it, because if he didn't, I might try to run at the marshal with a legal code and a bad idea. "Show the stay order," I said. He did. It glowed like righteousness. It was righteous. That hurt. Vale didn't smile. He didn't need to. He had shifted the ground. The hearing paused. The beacon dimmed to amber. The hum went back to a prelude. Waiting is a kind of battle. We stepped outside into the ring where the noodle cart owner ladled broth with a grace that had nothing to do with law. He looked at my face and gave me extra onions without comment. I ate standing up. Too fast. The heat shocking me into the present. Len punched the wall softly enough not to break his hand. Carré leaned her head against a bulkhead and whispered a song under her breath I didn't recognize. Talus spoke with care. The sector court can take days, weeks. They will not undo what we have done lightly, but they can bind it in deliberation. "We can work while we wait," I said. "We can teach while we wait," he corrected. Gentle and stubborn. Teaching is motion when you're forced to stand. We sat up in the market ring with a screen and a stool. We showed the mirror again, but slower, like a cooking lesson where the oil sings and nobody hurries the onions. We let people ask where they would fall in the cohorts. We listened. A grandmother wanted to know if her grandson's gig-moving crates counted as dock work or courier support. A teen asked if being between jobs meant being between rights. A trader asked if we could mirror future loans, not just past debts. "Maybe," I said to all of them, maybe yes, maybe better. The day folded, then unfolded under yellow lights. The sector marshal passed us once, gaze bored, hands tight. Vale stood at the edge of the ring like a man deciding whether to look at art he dislikes. He didn't walk away. That was something. While we waited, St. Lucia breathed under a slow draw. Talus ran diagnostics like a man kneeling to check fence posts after a wind. Len played cards with dock hands and lost with charm. Corray fell asleep on a crate for a full 10 minutes and woke with a plan. If the court stays us, we can still run a voluntary lattice, she said, eyes bright with the kind of tired that makes fools think they're prophets. No disbursements, just visibility. If it's voluntary, it's not adjudication. Talus hummed approval. It will annoy them. Good, I said. Annoy them with transparency until they squint. 2 days later, the sector court sent a message, not a ruling. A request. They asked us to submit, in plain language, the method, the risk, and the remedy. No volumes, no equations without metaphors. I wanted to kiss whoever drafted the order, then argue with them over whether metaphors belong in law. We wrote with Len's jokes stripped for bone and Carré's precision sharpened until it sang. Talus checked the numbers like a doctor checks a pulse by listening to the whole body and not just the wrist. We sent it with the lattice still glowing amber. We waited. People still ate noodles. The postmaster still sorted packets. Miri counted cracks in the floor and decided which ones were maps and which were just cracks. And then the court beacon lit a sideband, not the ruling, a hearing. Remote, with us on one side and the panel array on the other. Not yet judgment, a question in a room of questions. We took our places as if the floor under us were steady and the ship under us were not warm with the aftertaste of a coil that almost cooked her. The panel flickered to life 3 faces and 1 icon for a remote seat. Their eyes did the work of a room full of people. They had read. They had opinions. They had patience for one of us and not the other. And I didn't know which. The presiding judge spoke without preamble. Commander Ives, she said, your method is novel. Your courage is noted. Your tone is almost tolerable. Before we ask questions, we require a plain answer to a plain prompt. What is the cost of your victory? If you win. I looked at Talus without turning my head. Tell them the price, he said, not the receipt. The price. So, I did. I told them what we would pay in time and trust. I told them what we would pay in political shelter. I told them that some shipments would be late because we refused to accept fast theft disguised as maintenance. I told them that we would lose friends and gain fewer than we needed. I told them that my ship would carry heat scars you could only see if you put your cheek against the induction bay and listened with your face. And I watched Vale, for the first time, look at me like a person and not a category. See me and still disagree. The judge nodded once. A chess clock click. And the cost if you lose. I did not look at Talus. I didn't need to. Then the doctrine hardens. Then collars get prettier. Then we teach our children to kneel exquisitely and call it civic posture. The judge did not smile. We have heard enough for this session. We will call again. The panel blinked out. The beacon stayed amber. The room breathed. Vale's shoulders rose and fell in a way that made me think he was not immune to oxygen after all. I stood without knowing I had and found my feet moving toward the door. The market ring smelled like starfruit again, and solar, and the ghost of somebody's supper. People watched my face as if it were a thermometer stuck in a feverish patient. I didn't know what color I showed. I only knew my hands were steady and my throat wasn't tight. Behind my eyes, Talus threaded the map of what we had done with lines that did not make a noose. "We are in the corridor," he said, almost content. "And it is long enough for truth to walk without running. Walk the long hall until the doors open." The sector court reconvened with a tone like metal ringing underwater. The panels' faces were sober, lit by their own screens, eyelids heavy from reading. The beacon held at amber, humming in the bones, a candle that refused to flicker. The marshal stood rigid by the door, hand on sash, pretending to be a statue and failing at breath. I took my place at the rail and let the cold on my fingertips become focus. "Say the quiet rules out loud." The presiding judge leaned into the pickup. "This session is for questions of method," she said. "Commander Ives, explain your mirror in one passage a dockhand can carry home." Her eyes flicked to Leanne, who sat straighter as if called by name. Vale folded his arms and kept his face neutral, but his left thumb tapped once against his palm. "Start from a bucket," I said, "because buckets meet hands. You pour costs and credits into the same pail and look at the waterline. If someone hit a hose running in from the side, you pull it into the open and count it with the rest. Then, instead of guessing who got wet, you trace where every drop came from, and you send it back to the hands that got soaked. Count the water and the hose." The beam economist on the panel coughed into her fist. "Latency remains a concern. Subsidies arrive hours after tithes. Instant remittance invites oscillation." Her sentences had no fat on them. She carried math like a blade, too. Talus whispered a gentle cadence behind my thoughts and softened my tongue without loosening it. "We buffer decisions in escrow," I said. "The lattice shows the levels rise and fall in real time, but the gate for disbursement opens at predictable intervals. That prevents the slosh, keeps the room from drowning in noise, and gives this board sufficient notice to review exceptions. Make the clock work for fairness." Vale spoke without being asked. "Your metaphor is charming," he said, "but metaphors don't patch coils. While you admire the bucket, our stabilizers swallow a storm. Your mirror does not shave a single % off physical wear." His voice never rose. It could slice toast without leaving crumbs. "Neither does pretending credits don't exist," I said. "Counting honestly does not replace coils, but it keeps you from buying 10 you don't need and charging a widow for the 11th. The noodle vendor in the back wiped his ladle and tried not to smile. "If your math makes orphans, fix your math." The judge cut the air with 2 fingers. "Enough posturing," she said. "We compel a live demonstration of your remittance engine using nominal values. No disbursement. Pure visibility. Proctor Vale, your office will supply a representative feed. Commander, your lattice must ingest without manual massage." She looked like a person setting a broken bone. "It would hurt, then help." "We accept," I said. Vale inclined his head with theatrical humility. "We accept," he echoed. And the room understood that one of us was lying, and it wasn't about acceptance. Show them you can swallow the data cold. Talus opened the lattice like a surgeon opens a chest, steady, clean, silent. The beacon brightened to white, and the air picked up a faint scent like dust after rain. The feed arrived as a braid of narrow frequencies, each tagged with a gate's name and a timestamp that smelled of authority. It hit our buffer and spread across the wall in bands that pulsed like a slow heart. "Integrity check passes," Talus said. "There are delays baked into their timestamps. They're trying to lag perception." "Log the lag," I said. "Frame it for the room." He wrapped the delay in a blue ribbon on the display and wrote one plain line: delay between event and report 3 hours. 14 minutes. The audience breathed out, a sound like felt dragged over wood. The marshal's jaw twitched. Vale's thumb tapped twice now. Put the delay on a sticky note where everyone sees. The board leaned in. The baby hiccuped and then laughed at the white glow as if it were telling him a joke only he could hear. Leanne bit her lip hard enough to leave a mark. The expert in beam economics muttered good, and then pretended not to have said it. When the escrow line rose and held in place without jitter, the room felt a relief it had not known it was ready to grant. The judge nodded. Proceed to cohort framing. She said, minimal categories. Dock. Courier. Market. Emergency services. I said, plus a reserve for catastrophic events overseen by this board. I didn't let my eyes flick to Vale, but I felt his attention like a bee that wasn't sure whether to sting. Thread categories like you're weaving home. Public questions came like rain now. Quick and clean. A cleaner asked if support staff counted as dock. A teacher asked if school batteries funded by the market counted as emergency. A teen with grease on his cheek asked if apprentices were market or dock, then corrected me on a flange term and grinned like sunrise. We answered, and when we couldn't, we said the board would. The judge raised a hand. Proctor Vale, she said. Explain the origin of the gratitude doctrine for the record. She didn't need the origin for herself. She wanted his story to sit in the light beside ours. Vale drew himself taller without moving. The doctrine is a civic instrument, he said. In the early cycles, frontier users did not pay in ways that matched usage. A voluntary scheme produced free riders and failing gates. Gratitude captures the intangible benefit of stability. It signals respect to the spine that holds us. Saying spine doesn't make a collar a necklace. He wasn't wrong about free riders. He wasn't wrong about failure. He was wrong about the way you bind people to what keeps them alive. You don't teach respect with a tax people cannot predict. I said, you teach resentment and rote compliance. The ledger teaches better than the lash. He tilted his head a millimeter, acknowledging my trope and writing down my weakness in a private column, righteous metaphors. We are clean on the feed. Tallis said, we can take a heavier stream. They may try a stress test. They will, I said, and the floor under my boots didn't move, though it felt like it should. Brace for the tests. They pretend are accidents. The marshal lifted a wrist and flicked 2 fingers. The wall showed a spike from Gate Etta, a sudden maintenance draw paired with a duty roster that doubled in a minute. It was a stunt, staged as weather. The room gasped as numbers jumped in a way that felt like a ship's sudden yaw. Tallis held the buffer with something more patient than strength. They budgeted a surge to claim volatility, he said. We can smooth with a rule, or we can let it slap their own face. Let it slap, I said, then show the rule. We did both. The line spiked. The escrow line paused. The delay ribbon blinked brighter for the duration. When it settled, Tallis posted the rule in words that didn't need a manual. If a cost arrives faster than verification, it waits with a clock on it where everyone can see. People understood it in their bodies. Weights are different when they're visible and fair. Put a clock on pain so it doesn't last forever. The presiding judge leaned back. We have seen enough for this phase, she said. We are prepared to rule on the inquiry and the interim use of the lattice. The broader question of doctrine remains, but we will not pretend that doctrine exists in a vacuum. She glanced at the other faces. They nodded like careful metronomes. Vale's eyes lowered for the first time. He was counting costs, not votes. He had a ledger too, and its columns did not tilt toward joy. Hold his gaze when he looks down. An aide handed the marshal a slim slab. He passed it to the judge without touching the edge. She read, then spoke with the slow weight of hills. The court authorizes the lattice ledger for remittance visibility sector-wide for 1 cycle pending full review. We bar disbursement outside emergency relief during the stay. We suspend the gratitude tithe on humanitarian shipments until the review concludes. We order the proctorate to publish in one document all credits and subsidies attached to gate upkeep for the last 12 cycles. The room stayed very still for 1 heartbeat. Then breath returned like a tide bringing back bottles and lost sandals and hope. Miri clapped once and then hid her hands under her legs as if she'd broken a rule. The noodle vendor, failing at restraint, let his ladle chime the pot. This is not victory, but it is road. Vale's mouth thinned into a line with edges. He bowed exactly as much as law required. We comply, he said, and made it sound like a threat written by a polite man. We didn't leave. We pivoted. The board met immediately under the beacon and drafted emergency relief triggers with language tighter than hatch seals. Len argued for simple thresholds. Correa argued for layered checks. Leon argued for the pipes again, until the expert in beam economics laughed and said, "Fine, add a line about pipes. I'll bring a wrench." The baby slept through his first policy. We issued the emergency protocol before the shift bell. No tithes would be taken from convoys carrying medicine, filters, or staple rations during the stay. If any proctorate unit attempted assessment, the lattice would flash the call sign in white across every public screen until the unit backed down or produced an override signed by the court. We didn't need to threaten. We needed to embarrass with signatures. Make them sign before they touch a crate. The first test came not from the proctorate, but from hunger. A convoy from the boreal rim limped in with containers that had leaked cold and meat that wanted to rot. The docks smelled like iron and fat and thawed fear. The proctorate inspector on duty held up a scanner and said routine. And the scanner said tax. And the lattice said no, not in letters, in light. The beacon popped to white. The inspector flinched and then squared his shoulders like a man before a wave. "This is not humanitarian," he said, and looked like he wanted someone to define it. Then redefine it when it hurt. "Open a crate," Leon said. "Tell me if you want to explain to my son why he can't eat protein this week." The inspector opened a crate, then closed it. He set the scanner down and wrote in a notepad. No one needed him to write in anymore. His ears were very red. The light makes bullies read their lines twice. That night, St. Lucia sang. Not a human song, a system's lullaby. Talus ran the fan slower and set the cabin lights to a hue that made me think of riverbeds. I lay on my back in the crew lounge and counted the hairline fractures in the paint, like stars in a cold sky. Len shuffled cards and didn't let them fall. Curry drew circuits in condensation on her water bottle and then wiped them with her sleeve. "Heat scars minimal," Talus said softly, "but I will run warm for a while." "Cost 1, I said. "Political shelter thin," he said. "Admiral Sarrett has opponents who think gates should be clubs." "Cost 2, I said. "You will be called a zealot, then a bureaucrat, then a traitor, then if we win a committee." "I can survive committee," I said, and let the ceiling wobble into a smile. "We will pay in heat, friends, and names." The proctorate did not sleep. They sent a courier with a petition to narrow the emergency definitions. They sent an analyst to question our cohort choices with the charm of a well-trained blade. They sent a whisper to the market ring that the Commonwealth would seize the lattice when this was done. The whisper met the noodle vendor and died of starvation. We answered in the open every time. We added one line to the protocol by unanimous vote. Any amendments to the definitions must be posted on the lattice 24 hours before deliberation, with a plain language summary at the top, translated into the 6 most common tongues on station. If people could not read the thing that bound them, it wasn't law, it was theater. Translate power into words people eat. 2 weeks into the stay, the court called the final hearing. Not quite final, not forever, but final enough to shift our bones. The beacon hummed white without wavering. The room smelled like citrus cleaning solvent and new paper. Vale looked like a man who had practiced the right amount of sleep and not 1 second more. The marshal had to lean against the wall like somebody had taken his starch. The judge began with a sentence I wanted to keep in my pocket. "We have decided to decide," she said. "Dithering is also a doctrine. We decline it." Then she read the opinion. It wasn't long. It was clean. It said what we needed, not everything we wanted. The court revoked the gratitude tithe as a doctrine applicable to humanitarian shipments sector-wide, effective immediately. They suspended its application to commercial cargo until a full accounting of credits, subsidies, and bond holidays could be reconciled under public oversight. They authorized lattice-linked escrow ledgers for all gate-related fees and required cohort-based remittance rules. They ordered the proctorate to seat board members drawn by lot from dock, courier, market, and emergency services across stations, with rotation and recall provisions. They forbade private remittance engines under penalty of sanction. They wrote one line we hadn't asked for and needed anyway. Any policy that depends on arbitrary discretion by a single official lacks the dignity of law. The room didn't clap. The room breathed. Then it laughed, soft and dangerous, because sometimes you have to exhale the harm out of your lungs before you can speak. Write the precedent where it can't be erased. We did not celebrate with fireworks. We filed. We filed so hard the clerk had to sit down and breathe. We wired the escrow to the beacon and made the board sign off on the first remittance tick pennies at station scale. Medicine at Mary's height. We posted the proctorate credits on every public screen with the delays flagged, the hoses drawn, and the buckets counted. We trained runners to explain the system, standing on milk crates next to fishmongers. And then we paid. Not money, heat. 2 hours after the ruling, someone sent a surge through the docking umbilicals. It wasn't an accident. It slapped St. Lucia's coils hard enough that the induction bay sang like a struck bell. Talus hissed through the vents and killed 3 decks of lights before they popped. Corray burned her palm on a valve she kept from beveling into our faces. Len swore and laughed and swore again. "I can hold," Talus said, voice thinner than he liked to let me hear. "But if we hold, I have to vent heat into the cargo deck and ruin the rice." The rice belonged to 5 families who had pooled their savings to buy a pallet and resell it by the bowl. I saw their hands counting, their lips moving. I saw the boy with the printed ship. The rice would ruin, the ledger would show why. We would make it right, but the rice would still be ruined. The ship hummed and waited for my voice. "Vent," I said. "The ledger will remember, and we will pay. Burn a little now so others don't burn later." The board met on the deck that night with the smell of parboiled starch sweet and sad in the air. They voted to disperse from the emergency reserve to the Rice families. Leon cried without apologizing. The expert in beam economics bandaged Corray's hand and cursed like a poet. The noodle vendor made a pot and gave away bowls with an expression that forbade anyone from calling it charity. The proctorate announced an internal inquiry into the surge. The marshal looked embarrassed by the sentence he had to read. Vale sent a private message that said nothing and admitted more than it meant. He had not ordered the surge. He had not prevented it either. I sent him a reply with one line: "The lattice shows who you are when you sleep. The light doesn't close its eyes." Weeks rolled into a rhythm the station could metabolize. The lattice ledger blinked, recalculated, and steadied. Tithes on humanitarian convoys stopped being a throat rumor and started being a precedent carved into the boards you had to step over to enter the chamber. Markets priced with less fear. Couriers printed fewer prayers on receipts. The board made mistakes and fixed them loud. The proctorate argued and complied in alternation. A man teaching himself to dance without the song he loved. Admiral Sarrett came to see the beacon with her own eyes. She touched the housing like a person touches a holy thing without kneeling. "You cut a channel that cannot be closed," she said again. But this time it sounded like she was describing a river that had decided the shape of a valley. "Others will flood it," I said. "Then build banks," she said, and left me with a letter of censure for using a ship as a demonstration coil and a personal note that said thank you without saying it. Take the censure like a badge you don't polish. On a slow morning when the docking alarm stayed quiet and the market smelled like soap and cinnamon rather than panic and breath, Miri tugged my sleeve. Her hair was still knotted, but the knots had learned order. "Can I see the ledger up close?" she asked. "You see it every day," I said. "Up close," she said again, and I understood she wanted to put her fingers on truth. We took her to the beacon room. It was warmer than the hall. The housings singing a note too low to hear if you didn't put your cheek on the metal. She did. She pressed her face to the panel with one eye squinted shut and grinned so wide it hurt to look at. "It's loud," she said. "It's honest," I said. Honest sounds like hum and breath. Vale came 2 days later with a folder. Paper. Not because he was archaic, but because paper looks like humility. He asked for the dais, was granted it, and opened the folder as if it were an altar. He read a statement I did not expect to hear from his mouth. The proctorate requests that the sector court recognize the lattice ledger as an acceptable alternative to gratitude doctrine for all stations willing to seat oversight boards under public rules. He swallowed at the end. Not for effect. For water. He had not converted. He had conceded the method. That matters more than love. We held a final session to write the lock. It did not require poetry. It required 2 sentences and a signature. The board wrote both as if they were welding ribs. The court transmitted concurrence on a low band with a tone that sewed the sector together like thread through skin. The precedent entered the public rolls at 17:09 station time. The market did not stop. The noodle vendor did not raise prices. The children played a game with chalk and counted remittance ticks as points. St. Lucia cooled by 1 degree in the induction bay, which is what a blessing feels like when it is tired. The cost lingered. Carré's palm would carry a sift of scars like sugar dust. The Rice families learned the taste of emergency money and preferred the taste of rice. Talus ran warm for 2 more cycles, refusing to complain until Len threatened to recite poetry at him. "I remember by ledgers," he said one night, soft as an old story. "But I carry faces now. I don't think that's a bug. It's the patch we wrote when we decided to be more than accounting." I said. "Be angry carefully," he replied. "Be angry with measures and witnesses." On the day we undocked, the clamps let go with a sigh like a promise. The station's curve slid past the viewport. a smile with teeth cleaned by policy and flossed by oversight. The beacon on the underside glowed white and then cooled to amber as we drifted clear. Vale stood on the observation deck with his hands on the rail. He didn't wave. I didn't either. Some distances retell better without theater. We burned for the gate with a hum that tasted like mint on the tongue. The Argon Reach convoy answered our hail with voices I recognized and didn't. Leon's son coughed once in the background and then laughed at his own lungs for behaving. The boy, with the printed ship, ran along the ring until he had to stop because humans still obey limits even under beacons. Len dealt a last hand no one played. Corray checked the relief coils and left her palm flat on the panel an extra second, honoring the heat it had eaten for strangers. Talus threaded our departure log with a single italic line like a prayer written in pencil. We teach by numbers and remember by ledgers, never by collars. He didn't have to add it. He did. We cleared the ring and clipped the gate. At the moment, a courier on the market ring shouted a joke that didn't make sense to anyone off station, and everyone laughed anyway. The lattice ledger ticked a remittance for a cohort that would never know our names, and that was correct and good. The court record posted a final footnote like a pebble dropped into a well to hear the echo. From now on, a doctrine must be countable to be lawful. The beacon on the station cooled enough that you could put your cheek to it and hear the quiet and not be afraid. The marshal wrote a resignation letter with 3 sentences and left the sash folded on a chair. The noodle vendor bought a second ladle and said he was diversifying his portfolio. Children drew squares and circles and called them courts and beacons and ships, and then ran in lines that made no sense to anyone but their legs. The corridor of law had a bend at the end and opened into a room with windows we hadn't seen. We walked in without bowing and breathed air that smelled like solvent and new paper, and also oranges because the market ring found someone growing them on a tug with a garden. The law only bit where we chose. We had taken the leash from its mouth and written it into a ledger it could not chew. The court beacon cooled, a thin vapor grazing its housings. I think about the way numbers can become shelter when we demand they show their faces. I think about the heat we spent and the rice we ruined and the injuries that will itch in winter. I think about a doctrine dissolving because a room learned to look at a bucket and a hose at the same time. If there's a lesson I want the next station to learn faster, it's this: stop pretending that fairness is invisible. Count it. Count it where children sit in the 3rd row and read the footnotes out loud. And when you win, do not become the clerk of mercy. Become the architect of rules. Public ledger entry blinking confirmed. We stayed human by letting the room make us better than our pride, which means we will fail less loudly and fix more often and pay back what we break while showing the receipt to anyone who asks, if that costs heat and friends and names. Good. Bills make us honest. And if someday some new doctrine grows its collar in the dark, the lattice will find it. The board will drag it into brightness, and a child will read the footnote again and ask the only question that scares tyrants. We will count you.